Well, welcome. Good to have everybody here. Today we're going to be talking about effective remote presentations. We'll look at some of the things relating to setup and pacing and different things. So, first question for you is how often do you have to give some type of presentation? So let me throw the Slido in the chat here. Go ahead and keep that Slido up. It should have popped up on your right-hand side of your screen near where the chat and the participant list is. There should be an option there to do Slido, or you can click on that link. So how often do you have to give some type of presentation? Look like most of us are kind of multiplying less than, okay, monthly, weekly. Okay, so it looks like many of us are giving presentations at least on some type of regular basis. So 28% less than once a month. But this probably is going to, regardless of what your job title is, this is probably something that you are going to encounter at some point, giving some type of presentation. So what I want to do is go through and kind of look at some of the different things that I found that have worked well, and maybe some things that haven't worked as well, just to give you some ideas. Nothing in here is like an absolute, this is the right way to do it and this is the wrong way to do it. So what I'm hoping to do is give you ideas of things that might work well for you. So next question is, which do you prefer? Do you prefer to present in person, prefer to present remotely, or prefer not to present anything at all? My guess is there may be a little bit of selection bias here that if you don't like presenting at all, this isn't the talk that you'll come to. Not at all sounds nice too, yes. Okay, so most of us like to do it in person, but it's interesting how big the number is of people that prefer to do it remotely. And there definitely are some advantages of doing things remotely. For me, particularly, it's the travel time of getting anywhere. If I'm going to give an hour talk and it's just a matter of coming down to my studio, that's a lot easier. Don't have a choice, everyone works from home. Yes, then it's hard. You can't just go around to everyone's house and present to them. So, question you might ask is, what does this have to do with agility? A couple things I'll point out. One is that this talk has plenty of room for improvement. So, I'm trying to apply some agile principles to this talk of making it better. But the bigger thing is that if you're trying to deliver software effectively, one of the biggest things that needs to happen is communication. And I have seen projects fail horribly merely because there wasn't good communication happening at the right levels, or things were being communicated but not in a way that was really landing, even if the people communicating were trying to say the right things and otherwise would be headed in a good direction. So there's lots of benefit in being able to present your message more clearly in a way that people are paying attention. You've probably never been on a project like this where several months in somebody says, wait, I didn't know that, and the reason was because they weren't paying attention to some presentation that happened two months earlier. But that does happen from time to time. Hopefully it's never happened to you, but those are the types of things that if we're effective in the way that we present stuff, we can steer away from. Okay, so first we're going to look at 4 talk problems, or 4 problems that come up in talks, and then ways to deal with those things. And I want to mention a lot of the stuff, 2 books that I've read, I'm just interrupting myself, I see, that I felt were particularly good on this is the Harvard Business Review Guide to Persuasive Presentations, and evidently showing a green book on a green screen doesn't quite work right. But anyway, this is a good book. I think if you buy it new, it's fairly expensive, but you can get it off eBay or used off Amazon for quite a bit less. The other book that I was pleasantly surprised with was the TED Talks by Chris Anderson. He goes through and gives lots of examples of different talks and what was effective about them, including some that weren't. But this was a pretty good book in just thinking about how to present stuff. So those are 2 things I'd recommend taking a look at. Okay, so we're going to look at 4 problems here. So problem number 1, the talk just doesn't feel fulfilling. Have you ever been on a talk and if you've ever been somewhere and you've given a talk and it just hasn't really landed, even if the content was good, it just doesn't feel like it had a good overall story arc, might be a way of putting it. And I want to point out something here. So here's a question for you. So join the Slido and vote for, why does George have a golf ball in this? And there's not necessarily a correct answer. All of them are correct in one way or another, I believe. And I see Astrid saying that hybrid's the worst for presentations. I've trying to do workshops hybrid has been very, very interesting. I've had more success with it than I thought I would, where I had some of the hands-on workshops I have where we've got people, about half the team is remote, about half the team is in person, and it definitely is challenging. But with our technology, there's things you can do depending on the workshop and stuff that I've had a couple times where it's actually worked a lot better than I was expecting. But yes, the hybrid stuff is very, very challenging because you can't cater to one or the other. You've got to find ways to do both. Okay, so why is George have his golf ball? He's been pretending to be a marine biologist. He recovered it for Kramer. He has just lost the girl of his dreams, or he's linking the end to the beginning. And yeah, the point I'm trying to make is that he's linking the end to the beginning. And in this episode, it starts off with Kramer's been out just knocking golf balls out into the ocean. Going through golf balls, knocking them out into the ocean. And at the very end of it, you find out that George has been telling this girl he's a marine biologist, and he gets out to the beach, and there's a whale there that's struggling to breathe. And he goes, since he's supposedly a marine biologist, he goes up and reaches into his blowhole and pulls out the thing that's been obstructing its ability to breathe. It's the golf ball, presumably one that Kramer's been knocking out into. And this is like the very end, the closing scenes. I believe his thing is at that moment that I chose to tell her that I was not a marine biologist, and she dumps him, even though he had saved the whale. So all of these are correct, but one thing Seinfeld does a very good job of is taking the thing at the something at the beginning that seems not particularly important, and then it shows up at the end, and it turns out it's caused all this mayhem along the way, or it somehow wraps things up. And it's part of what makes the Seinfeld episodes so fulfilling to actually watch. You get to the end of it, assuming you like them, but you get to the end of it, and there's something that feels like it tied the whole thing together. So this is something worth kind of thinking about when you're looking for a way to make your talks stick and land well, finding ways to take what's at the beginning and tie it in at the end, tie it back. Interesting side note, in this particular episode, the production crew, or Seinfeld and the writers, wanted to get the animatronic Free Willy, and so they were requesting to get the animatronic Free Willy in order to be able to actually film this. And in the episode, they never show the whale. Like, it's just mentioned about that happened, but they never show anything. And they thought, if we could get the animatronic version of the Free Willy, we could actually show this and be really cool and everything. Well, there was evidently some type of horrible misunderstanding, and whoever passed it on up the chain for what they were doing thought they were actually requesting to bring in the real whale, the Free Willy, and use him in the thing. And they're like, no, we can't do that, and it's too expensive and stuff. Anyway, it's a fun side fact about Seinfeld. Okay, and so this thing of bringing stuff back at the end, we see that with the idea of having a topic sentence and a clincher sentence. We also see it in musical ABA format, where you have something that's presented in the beginning, and then you change it in all these ways, and then you present it in the end to remind you of what happened in the beginning. I've tried using that in some of my videos, or some of my talks. This is a talk I gave where we actually have not done this one for a while. Should probably do it again. But talking about the way that we develop software and how we're very sure it's very, if we look at Star Trek and say, what do we imagine the future to be like? We're pretty sure that the way we develop software today is nothing like what Star Trek's future is imagining. And then we go through all this stuff kind of talking about how we can improve the software development process. And then at the end, just bring it back around to a Star Trek reference, which was my attempt to try to get that beginning and end tied together. So the question you're trying to answer here, or the thing you're trying to ask yourself, is: does the end of your talk help show the value of what happened at the beginning of your talk? So this is a simple way to make talks more effective and make them land better and more memorable. Okay, problem number 2: people are tuning out or losing focus. So let's try an experiment here. Imagine that I'm wanting to talk to you about boredom, and so I have all this stuff. And this wasn't AI generated. This is actually from a paper about boredom and a study about boredom. So we got all this stuff about boredom. And let's say I'm going through and highlighting things from this paper about how boredom works, so what the meaning of the word is and things like that. So how effective do you think that would be versus if this is what I've got on the screen while I'm talking about it, versus just having the word boredom on the screen and then me explaining the things that I want you to know, that's relevant for my point. Or even better, what if I just do this? And we're going to talk about boredom, and I've just got this on the screen. And we're going to talk about boredom, and I've just got a single picture. So which would keep your attention more? Multiple paragraphs about boredom, a single word boredom, or a picture of the fox yawning? So it's like most people are saying the fox yawning. Now, you could make a case for saying the fox yawning might distract from the idea of boredom because you're like, well, what's the fox doing? Is he hungry? You know, what's going on? There are lots of stuff kind of around that. Um, so maybe the single word boredom actually cuts out some of the distraction and just focuses on we're talking about boredom right here. But no one here thinks that multiple paragraphs about boredom would be helpful. So think about when you're putting your presentations together, are you putting so much up on the screen that it's detracting from what you're trying to say? Because we've got reading versus listening. And if I'm trying to tell you something and I've got important information I'm trying to convey, and I give you a whole bunch of stuff to read on the screen, there's a good chance that it's going to detract from what I'm trying to say. Even if like that, those paragraphs about boredom, even if it's good stuff, there's probably only certain parts of it that I'm really wanting you to get focused on. Well, by showing it and then trying to tell you stuff, I'm dividing your attention at best. Or you might just not be listening to me at all. And oftentimes, I'll see slides that people have created that have so much information on it. And they put it up, and I'm looking at it like, okay, this must be important because they chose to put it in a slide, but then they're trying to talk. And this is where a big thing that I see as an issue in presentations is when you create a slide deck that's meant to be given to someone for them to read on their own and understand information. And then you take that same slide deck and do it as a presentation. Those are very, very different channels of how you're trying to communicate with people. And trying to use the same slide deck in both places probably isn't going to be very effective. You're going to, usually what's going to happen is you're going to be in a situation where you've designed it for people to read, and then you're either just reading the stuff to them, which is annoying because they can read faster than you can, and then you've got that split attention. Or you end up with something, this I see less often, but where it's not any good to just send stuff out. And in my thinking, you're better off write your slides to keep them focused on what you're saying, and then if you need to, write up a single page summary of the stuff they need to know just as prose and send that on to people. If you ask someone to read, you're asking them to stop listening. There's a lecture series that my kids and I went through, our family went through on just how to speak effectively. And this guy suggests never using slides because he said if you show people stuff, you're going to be distracting them from what you're wanting them to think about, which is what you're saying. I think there is some effectiveness in it, and for me, it's helpful because I can keep track of exactly where I am in my talk, so it makes it easier for me in that. But the point is, if you ignore that point entirely, it will be to your peril. And just kind of the idea that if you're saying you need to stop and read something, you're telling them to stop listening to you. Okay, next problem. You've got great content, but no impact. Yes, this person was actually suggesting not to use any PowerPoint slides at all. For me, I think the better balance is saying, can I make sure my slides are focusing people on what I'm saying more so than detracting from what I'm saying. Now, this particular college professor was suggesting that he thought it was no good. And no good to have the slides at all, that they're always going to be distracting. I think that's a little bit extreme, but I think the overall point is probably worth thinking about. Laster said, reading and listening both speak to our word processing capability, and visual go into another space in the brain, I think. So that's an interesting point. Like, if we're giving a picture, is that something, because you don't read the picture, you see the picture. If the picture is somewhat related, maybe that helps keep us focused. Okay, so great content, no impact. How would you measure the success of a presentation? So just type a few words. What would you, when you finish a presentation or attend a presentation, what are the things you would use if you had to give one metric for how well did this go? What would you want to measure? You get engaging questions. Okay, if people are engaged, if they're paying attention enough to ask questions, that's great. Call to actions made, so like people know what to do from it. Ratings on the evaluation, questions received after. Memorable and people are excited about the topic. Engagement, quality of questions. Yes, questions are a really good way to tell what people are doing. People doing what you want them to do, following the vision. That's very well stated. What people remember the day after. I really like that because, yes, if it's great and then they don't remember any of it. Audience request to talk post-presentation, like what types of conversations happen afterwards. Taking pop quiz, high scores. Okay, well we do a lot of that here, so that's great. Interactive content, so like how are people interacting these things? So these are all very legitimate ways, and no one actually said, are there snacks? I see, which I consider to be a hallmark of great presentations. If you have snacks, that's a very good sign, which is harder to do remote, right? I've considered sending everybody a bag of popcorn and encouraging everybody to pop the bag of popcorn and then we're gonna talk, but haven't dealt with those logistics yet. Okay, so these are all different ways to measure the success of a presentation, and I think a very big thing for you is to be thinking when you're making a presentation is what is my goal and how can I increase my chances of that happening? So your goal usually is some type of action. And what I want to separate here is it's not a matter, your success isn't determined by what is conveyed. That is very important. But what is remembered is actually probably more important because what is remembered is going to determine what is actually done. We can convey all kinds of great things, and if no one's paying attention, it doesn't, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, did it make a sound? Well, if a great presentation is given but nothing is remembered, was it worth doing at all? Or I like the one, if a tree falls in a forest and lands on a mime, does anyone care? But anyway, what's remembered is what you really want to focus on because that's what's going to determine what is done. So ways to make things more memorable and try to engage people more. One thing, metaphors and analogies. And so for example, I have a talk that I give where we talk about sizing stories, and I give an example of my kids trying to figure out how much they can get through this stack of books, or me getting through this stack of books, and how we'd measure that. Would it make sense to measure the words and count all the words in it? Well, that would probably take more time than it's worth. We might as well read the book. Or can we just measure the number of books and assume each book will take a... But the point is, this gets you thinking about something in a space that's very different than what we're talking about when it comes to software, where things are more abstract and harder to reason about, and we're dealing with bits instead of physical things. So this type of thing, so what's obvious when it comes to books is very easy to miss when it comes to software. So by using this as an analogy, it gives people an example in a different area, and then we can reason by analogy, how does this work over in this other area when it deals with software. And this is a way to make things memorable to people because you get to interact with it in a different way, in a way that's maybe a little bit more concrete. And usually when I give the talk, I've actually physically got the stack of books in my hand that we're doing. And if I'm in person, they're sitting on the desk and people come up and pick up the books afterwards and take the picture of the, look at the picture of Pinocchio or whatever. It sticks with you in a way that we've now got something that we're anchoring the idea that's very abstract to something that's a lot more concrete. Yeah, Astor's got a point. The action might be to stop doing something. That's a good point. So another way to help make things to where it's going to be memorable are outrageous examples. So if you attended the behavior-driven development talk here recently, I had this example of the Specs Wasp, and we go through an example from that. Well, that's an outrageous thing that sticks with people. Sometimes I had one person said she's very traumatized because she hates wasps, and so she didn't want to attend that section of the talk. And so that's legitimate, but it's very outrageous. This is what people are very, very likely to remember. Where we went through and showed a BDD scenario for the Specs Wasp behavior. Another example, and I'm using these examples because these are things people have told me that stuck with them. So in thinking about how far we plan ahead, so how far do you need to see ahead? Do you need to know about the deer that's 100 miles away? And my point was trying to make at some point, thinking too far ahead distracts you from what can be done right now. So the example is going to show you the danger of looking too far ahead. So if we look really far ahead at the deer that are 100 miles away, we might miss the giant chicken that's right in front of us right now. Okay, so this is a crazy idea, probably inspired by watching the Hoboken chicken emergency as a kid, which if you haven't seen is sheer madness of this giant chicken running around eating people's potatoes, if I remember right, in Hoboken, New Jersey. Anyway, it's very, very silly story, but what's silly in the story also makes for an interesting comparison here. And the point was to get people thinking about, are we missing the things that's right in front of us because we're so focused on something that's far away? So it's an outrageous example, but I've had people come up and talk to me like months after this presentation saying, yeah, I grew up on a farm and we have to watch out for deer and chicken. And they're remembering stuff about the presentation. Hopefully they're relating it to what we were actually talking about. But when they get to a point where the team's thinking about something that's way far off, it's like, hey, remember that stupid and crazy chicken example Mark gave? Are we thinking about things too far off? Are we looking at the deer that are 100 miles away instead of the giant chicken right in front of us? So now I show these examples. There are also failures. I've used examples before and people are like, Mark, I have no idea what you were talking about. I usually try to run things by my kids to see if I think it's too far out there. But these don't always land. They're not always perfect. But I think they're worth trying, because if we can get good analogies, good metaphors, and good outrageous examples that stick with people, our messages will be more memorable. Remember, your goal is action. It doesn't matter what information is conveyed. It matters what's remembered and what change comes from that. Okay, so next problem. People don't understand the importance. So you're conveying something that's very, very important, and people just don't get why it's important. There's and I think this came from some of those books I mentioned, it comes from a lot of things, but it kind of made it real to me when reading those books, that there's this idea when you're presenting things that you want to take stuff and take people through this kind of emotional journey of despair. Here's how things are not going well, right? But here's the hope. We can do this. And so now we've got a plan for solving this problem. But now, here's another thing that's got despair. But there's hope. And it can be, I'm using hope and despair. It could also be, here's a problem we're dealing with. So it's a low when we describe the problem and get people invested in the idea that this is actually an issue that needs to be resolved. And then we've got a solution. And we've got the high point of the solution. Or thinking in terms of, here's today's difficulties. This is what I use a lot when I'm coming in and coaching with new teams, and say, what are the things that are hurting you today that don't feel good or feel like you're not being able to effectively deliver software. So these are all the difficulties we've got today. But then describing a tomorrow that can look very, very different, where things work in a different way, and we're able to feel engaged and excited about the development work we're doing and feel like things matter, not like we're trudging through things. So today's difficulties and tomorrow's potential. And there's different ways to do this. One way I use a lot of times with team is actually, putting up a poll and asking people what they're seeing. So for example, we can establish that it's a problem to think in terms of the percentage complete when we're not like dealing with actual stories that are done. For example, like saying we're 30% done with requirements, so we're 30% done, or we're done with requirements, so we're 30% done with the project, which is not how it works, but some places are measuring progress like that. But giving people an example to actually interact and vote for things and then talk through that. And through this, we can kind of point out, here's our despair, here's our low part, and then talk about how we can change and do things differently in the future. Help people feel the problem before you talk about the plan to solve it. Not everyone will agree that everything is a problem. And so taking them through that, through kind of that trough of despair of saying, here's, I want to say this carefully, not just here's how bad everything is going, but in some sense, if you're presenting a solution, you need to make sure that people agree on the need for a solution. And so taking people down, like here's how things are going poorly, here's how we're going to, we can make this better if we want to work on it. Okay, so those were problems with presentations. So now let's look at 4 visual problems. So just in the idea of doing remote presentations and trying to make sure that what we're doing looks good, keeps people engaged in the way that things look. Problem. Your talk really needs to be drawn on a whiteboard. So this is a common thing. I don't do as many of these, but I did some talks here last week for a client where we really needed to use a whiteboard for stuff. As a matter of fact, right behind, this is a green screen right here, but if I bring it down, there's a whiteboard or a blackboard behind me. And okay, Google, turn on the blackboard.
Okay.
And I'll go through this setup in a little bit, but this is, I found, while I like digital whiteboards, they're cool and all, I found it's kind of hard to beat a real blackboard that you're writing on. So digital whiteboards, what I found those work really good for is if you need everyone to draw and they're remote. Now WebEx has a built-in one. We do my family gets together with some other, or our kids get together with some other kids, and we're going through Robinson Crusoe on Monday nights. And usually we'll put up a whiteboard and everybody just starts sketching pictures of whatever is being talked about. It's talking about cannibals, so we had skull and crossbones. Different people were drawing things. Kind of hard because a lot of people just have a mouse. But if you've got a digital whiteboard and everyone has a good drawing tool, this can be a very, very effective way to do things, getting people to collaborate. I've finally gotten to the point where I'm more comfortable drawing on stuff with an iPad. I've tried a bunch of things, and I feel I can get something that's almost, but not quite as good as actually having a physical board. If you're looking at actually using something physical, what I've got back there is a physical glass blackboard. So why not use a whiteboard instead of a blackboard? Well, it's because of neon liquid chalk. And if you use neon liquid chalk and put up some black lights like what I've got there, you get something that looks like this. Now, this is challenging to do because the one I've got is highly reflective. And so it took a whole lot of work to make sure you can't actually see the camera set up and things. Actually, you can see it just a little bit down at the bottom there. So it's very reflective. I'm using polarizing filters and stuff to help get rid of that. But the setup here is actually this blackboard, and then I've got all these black light party lights around the edges. So I've got the 27-watt ones across the top, aiming down, and then I stack the smaller ones along the side, shining in. That's what gives that glowing reflection stuff. Now, not that you have to do this. You can obviously use built-in tools and stuff, but I find for actually, if I'm doing a talk that's very needing to write stuff, if we were in person, I'd do it on a whiteboard. This seems to work pretty well for that. I feel like I've got a lot of fluidity in what I'm doing, and it looks good on the screen with the blackboard. I've tried a whiteboard and I couldn't get it to look in ways that I was happy with. So as far as presentation, this is a tool that you can look at. I would suggest if you are looking at getting something like this, look for something that has low reflectivity. That's one thing I did not do when I get this one. They sent me 3 and they kept breaking. This was the 3rd one. Anyway, so that's an idea. This isn't something you have to do, but if you're looking for a good way to convey stuff visually, this can be a way to possibly do that. Okay, next question about visual presentation. So take a guess. On my first fully remote project, I was told I looked like Data, Tom Cruise, Jabba the Hutt, Chewbacca, Cary Grant, a Time Lord, or Dick Clark. I probably looked a little more like Chewbacca before I shaved my beard off a few weeks ago. I actually was on one project, and it wasn't this one, but I was on a project one time, and somebody found out how old I was, and they're like, "Oh, Mark Shedd's the Dick Clark of software development," because he thought I looked very, very young. He thought I was a lot younger than I actually was. Okay, well, half of you are voting for Chewbacca. It actually was Data. So here's a presentation problem. You look like Data from Star Trek. In this particular situation that I was in, we were on video conference, and the video person that was in charge of making sure everything worked came into our room to help us fix some stuff out. It's like, "Man, Mark, you look like Data from Star Trek," because my face looked so white and stuff. So he changed my name in the way it showed up in the video conferencing system. So it said Mark Pinkman Shed, and I couldn't change it. It was like this for weeks because he had said that way, and then finally he took it off. But so I took that as a sign that maybe I should invest in some better lighting. And what I found is you can get, and these aren't particularly expensive from Amazon. They're LED lights with a big piece of cloth in front of it to make it spread out. Matter of fact, I've got one. I don't know if you see this right here. That's what's right here, shining over on the side. And these, like I said, they're not particularly expensive, but they're color balanced. This particular one I can change to different colors and make it warmer or more just plain white light if I want to. So I invested in some of those lights, got it to where I wasn't looking quite like Data, and he eventually took the Pink Man designation off my name. But lighting can make a big difference in how you actually look to people. So problem, talking head can't interact with the content. So if you notice, like when we had those up and downs that we're doing here, I was able to actually point to it. And if I'm just a talking head in a box, I could possibly do a mouse going over it or something like that. But what I'm using here is actually using a green screen. I showed you how I brought it down. So there's actually a green screen behind me, and then I'm putting myself in front of that kind of weatherman style. And in a lot of situations, this makes for a more engaging presentation. It looks like you're engaging with the content more like you would be if you were in a room with a big screen behind you. So the way to get that, there's a couple different ways. I'll just kind of show you the setup here. One is using compositing software. OBS, so obsproject.com, is a great way to do that. And what it will do is let you take a computer and then take multiple input sources and then composite them all together. So here was a picture of just some crazy stuff I was doing to try it out. So I've got one camera that's showing me here, and then I had a input from a computer here on top of that, and then over here is another camera showing something at the same time, and you can put it together in all kinds of different ways. And then what it does is it will actually take all that stuff. The OBS software will take that and put it out as a virtual camera. So it shows up as if it's a webcam, and so you can just take whatever software, WebEx, Teams, or whatever, and say, okay, use this virtual camera, and then whatever the software is outputting will show up there. So OBS Project is a great thing to look at if you're looking for a way to do these type of green screens or things like that. Another problem, talk needs good visuals. So one thing is slide software, and I've tried a bunch of different things. So what is your preferred presentation software? If you have your choice of what you use, what would you want to use? Keynote, PowerPoint, Mentimeter, Prezi, Harvard Graphics, and it has been, I doubt it wouldn't surprise me if no one here is familiar with Harvard Graphics. It was a presentation package years and years ago that had the option to, you could design your slides in it, then output a file format and send it back to the company, and they would send you back actual slides to put in a projector. So that may give you an idea of how old that is. Okay, so most people are happy with PowerPoint. Next, Keynote. Keynote's actually my favorite for creating slides, but it doesn't work with Slido, which is kind of my preferred thing for doing polling. PowerPoint, I've started tending back to doing more of that. This particular one's in Google. But I've started tending back toward PowerPoint just because it works well with Slido, and they've improved a lot of things. What I like about Keynote is the drawing tools and the ability to do just two-dimensional images of things. They have a huge library that's just built in that then you can edit. And so I found it's a lot easier. Like that thing I showed you earlier of the Star Trek Enterprise, that was all just drawn in Keynote using the built-in tools for stuff and the built-in shapes. Either I haven't developed the dexterity with PowerPoint, or it's actually easier to do in Keynote. Anyway, so that's for people. Mentimeter, I've used Mentimeter just as the slides, and it's nice because then you have the Mentimeter polling stuff built in, and Mentimeter stuff looks really good. The visuals are really great. Prezi I like because the presentation is the way it flows and moves things around, kind of animates you, and you dive into a part of the presentation and then back out. So you dive in and then back out, and I think that's very, very effective. The problem is I haven't found a good way to integrate Prezi with any of the interaction tools. They used to be able to, and more recently they didn't. I'm hoping that comes back at some time. But anyway, lots of different options for presentation. Here's some of them. So this over here, so I think this one up here is Prezi. It's very, very simple, very, very basic, but if you're mainly wanting to focus on the interactions, it works really well for that. Google Slides, there's a Prezi presentation, and you basically go into each piece of it, and then there's Keynote. And like I said, that image right there was actually just drawn in Keynote, of taking shapes and putting them together. Another thing that you probably are familiar with, and this has somewhat been replaced with AI, depending on how you feel about AI images. But Unsplash and Pexels is a great place to get, and there's some others out there as well, but great place to get royalty-free images that you can use in your presentation. The AI, it's interesting. My favorite AI image, I should have thrown it in here, is when I was doing one for mob programming, and it's got all these farmers with beards yelling at this giant computer screen, and they've got pitchforks and torches and stuff like that, and I love the idea of, it was really funny from a mob programming standpoint. But AI tends to have, and it's getting better, I think, a little bit of a feel to it that somehow doesn't always feel quite right. And the other thing that I find with it is it's also easier to get something that doesn't feel quite right when you're looking at it, and also feels like it's not actually representing things as well sometimes. So if you can find the perfect image with it, and like I said, it's getting significantly better. If you find perfect image with it, it's great. but there's something about an actual photograph still that I think sometimes works better. Okay, next problem. Making remote feel like it's in person. So problem. Okay, so we went through four problems with the with presentation, getting people to pay attention and stuff. Then we talked about four problems just with visuals. Now problems with making remote feel as close to in person as possible. So a problem person looks like they're avoiding eye contact with you. Have you ever had something where like you've got somebody looking over here and they're talking and they're not looking at you at all because their presentation is over here? And I may have been doing some of that right now because my presentation shows up down here. Your pictures and stuff show up, well, right over there next to the camera. So you're just getting to the point that you can look at the camera or setting yourself up to be successful with looking at the camera. Here's one of my early things with doing remote presentations and remote conferencing and stuff was actually I took a camera that had an HDMI output on it. I think it's an HD camera, so it was as high quality as I could use at the time, and then took this tripod and kind of bent it around my monitor so it kept it as close to the top of the screen as possible. And it made a big difference in my ability to make sure that I was looking toward the people I was trying to be talking to. I've seen some crazy things that actually put a small camera right in the center of your monitor so you're looking directly at it. There's also some AI things that will change the video feed to move your eyes so it looks like it's looking right at the person. Sometimes it looks a little creepy, but I've been surprised at how well it actually seems to work. I'm not using that anywhere. This is more of the setup that I'm dealing with looking at you right now. So I've got a camera up above what I'm looking at, and so there's this WebEx here. I'm actually using this external camera up here. Oh, there it is. That's tied into the compositing setup. We're doing on time. Okay, good. And I've moved googly eyes on the camera to talk to them. That's great. I've actually moved more recently, so you see this monitor over to the side over there. I put another one right here next to it, as close as I can to it, that's actually got your faces on it. Just to try to keep me more focused on that. In a lot of cases, what would work well is actually take my slides and put them up closer to the camera. So I'm looking a little bit up. So if you see me tend to looking down, it's because I haven't actually gotten it as close as it could be. Okay, another problem, poor video quality. This is less of a problem now. I think laptops have changed out and cameras have gotten better, but it wasn't that long ago that we were looking at things like this. So in just thinking about some of the different types of cameras, just a couple thoughts. Some of these you may be just using what's on your laptop, and that's great. I found that of these cameras, so the differences here is we've got DSLR. A lot of us probably have the DSLRs like that Nikon somewhere in our closet or something. Those are very high quality cameras, but they actually have a mirror in them. So what happens on a lot of them is if you take a long picture, the mirror will stay up, but it wasn't meant to stay up indefinitely. So you can, on many of those cameras, you can only shoot about 20 minutes at a time, 10, 20 minutes at a time before the camera comes back down. I used that for a while early on, but got tired of having to deal with the camera flipping back and forth. Then we've got regular webcams, which have gotten better in quality. I still haven't found a webcam, like a small webcam like that I've been super happy with. What I'm using is like that Sony that's sitting there. That is a mirrorless camera. So it doesn't have anything that flips back and forth. It's just, so that one can shoot just indefinitely. I've been very happy with how that one turned out. And then a lot of us probably have old just video cameras sitting around or something. Those can work pretty well, particularly if you get them white balanced and stuff. And one of the big differences between these is if you're dealing with a webcam, it's usually got a USB input into your computer, which is how a lot of video conferencing software is going to be set up to expect. If you're dealing with one of these other cameras that have just an HDMI output, then you're going to need to get some way to actually get it into your software. We'll look at ways to do that in a minute. The other thing is like I'm using WebEx, and this is what is actually encoding my stuff and sending it to WebEx. I've got one of these. Now I'm using the external input from it, but for some calls I'm actually using a built-in thing. Originally those things cost, the room kits, I don't know, they were like $5,000 to $8,000 or something like that. But as people change things out, you can get them online for maybe $100 or $200 or something like that. So I've had really good luck buying used equipment off eBay and using it for things, particularly things that let me move some of the processing into just built-in hardware that's dedicated for that particular need. And Aster, I really like the googly eyes idea. I'll have to try that sometime. Okay, there's cameras. Okay, another problem: no feedback or interaction with remote participants. Um, so when it comes to video and audio, making sure that there's ways that you can talk to people. For example, I've actually got all of you, and I know this isn't a lot of us talking back and forth, but I've got everybody here up on a screen next to my camera. People that are on video, I can see because they show up there. I was doing something with earlier this week with a group in Europe, and they were using Microsoft Teams. And for some reason, one time we did it, I couldn't see anyone. And then a few days later, when I did my next talk with them, it was a group of maybe 20, 30 people, I could see them on video. And it's amazing how different it is when you can see people and see their reactions to stuff, particularly when it's a smaller team that you're coaching with. But the ability to see people and see how they're reacting to things lets you speak a whole lot better, and adapt to how people are feeling based on if you see you're starting to lose people, you can do something exciting. If you spill your coffee accidentally, if you look and see people are confused. So just that ability to take advantage of if people are on video where you can see them, getting that where you can see instead of it being behind a screen somewhere else where you can't see. Chat, another thing, you want that to be generally where you can see it. Like I said, I've got two monitors up top of things, and I can actually see if people say something and comment on it, or you may have been here before when I've gone for a minute or two and people are like, wait, we can't hear you because I accidentally left something muted. If I couldn't see the chat, I'm not sure how long it would go before I finally realized what was going on. Other thing with interaction is just these tools that let us participate and poll and get feedback and kind of talk through those things. So this is an example of some of the things with Poll Everywhere. That's what I started with. I still use it from time to time. It works pretty good. Another good tool, Mentimeter. I really like their visuals, particularly this thing where you've got like a 2-axis graph of showing different things. That's been very, very effective for stuff. It lets you actually do the entire slideshow in Mentimeter. You just don't have that much formatting options. And then WebEx is WebEx bought Slido. So this is what I've been using more recently because it integrates well with the environment that you're in, and it works very, very well too. And there's others out there as well. So just curious, and this is just for my edification, which polling tool, if you noticed a difference between them, do you prefer for Agile Lunch and Learns? Do you prefer Slido, like what we're using here, Poll Everywhere, which we've used, I think we used that one, the BDD talk here a few weeks ago, Mentimeter, which we haven't used for a while, or would you rather mail in a postcard for interaction? Okay, well, it looks like most people are tending towards Slido, but I'm glad to see Poll Everywhere and Mentimeter are getting a little bit of love here. But lots of different options. One thing to be aware of, though, is we've had situations where at one point, it hasn't been an issue as much anymore, but some of the things when I was doing some stuff with the Treasury, people couldn't get to Poll Everywhere. Now, it was easy to work around because we just throw up the URL or give a QR code, and they could just do it on their phone. And for the stuff we were interacting with, that was fine. But every once in a while, we've run into that issue. Okay, another problem. The complex setup ruins the flow of an in-person talk. So that happens with our polling tools and all kinds of different things. How do we actually get through the talk without having so much complexity that it's hard to focus on what you're saying, or where the technology gets in the way? And I've simplified things so I don't use this anymore, but when I had a more complex setup with OBS, this is what I was actually using. I got a Stream Deck, and I was able to set it up using BitFocus Companion and Viscero. So I was able to actually move between my slides, but also change what was happening on the encoding computer. Like I said, I don't use this anymore, but I was able to reduce all the things I needed to do down to just a few buttons, and then had that trigger the things. Now, between doing this and what I'm doing now that's a lot simpler, I think the lot simpler is better because there's fewer things that can go wrong. I may eventually go back to doing some stuff like this, but just be aware this is a tool that can let you move through some stuff and kind of abstract away some of the complexity of needing to change from thing to thing. So we're always going to look at possible technical problems. So imagine you're going before a judge online, but your video is showing you as a cat. What do you do? So imagine this technical problem. And this is not a hypothetical situation. Oh, cool, Stephanie. I'll have to look at Lucid Spark. I'm not familiar with that. Okay, so you go before a judge online, but your video is showing you as a cat. What do? Stop until you fix the problem, ask to proceed anyway, or request a delay while you find a 13-year-old to help you. And I don't know if you've seen the video before. Steve's answer, yes. Mentioned several times that you're not actually a cat. Which is indeed, Steve, is indeed what happened here, right? Here's the situation. We've got the judge and another lawyer, and one lawyer shows up looking like a cat for some reason. The cat is talking, and evidently his granddaughter or something had messed with the computer and switched to the cat. He couldn't figure out how to turn it off. What I thought was funny about this is you find it online, is there's this thing right here saying recording of this hearing or live stream is prohibited, but it got recorded, very much to the joy of people around the world watching a lawyer there trying to figure out that he's trying to explain that he's not actually a cat. So technical problems, right? We've got technical problems that we're going to run into from time to time. So here's another problem. What you want to show is not where you want to show it. So encoders are something to be aware of because they can be a good solution to some of these problems. And so here's an encoder, it may be cheaper now, but 4K encoder. What the encoders do is it takes an HDMI input and gives you a USB output. So anything that has an HDMI output, you can turn into a webcam, basically. So theoretically, depending on how the encoders work, you could plug a DVD player into one of these and then put it in as a webcam. So these types of things are how we get stuff from the camera or whatever sources we have, another computer or whatever, and then get that into our computer. Now, in a lot of situations, you may have a work computer that you're not allowed to run some of the software that we've mentioned on it. But there may be an exception for plugging in your own webcam, and that's what these work as a webcam. It just takes HDMI and converts it to USB. So in a lot of situations, even in government situations I've been in where it's really, really locked down, this particular thing is allowed. So it's something to look into if you're trying to do something more complex, but you can't install the software you need on the work computer. I'll show a layout of that in a minute. So some of the things we can do is use higher quality camera. We can present on the video channel, which is what I'm doing here. I'm presenting on the video channel rather than, usually in a lot of cases you have the video channel, which is going to be your face, and then you've got where your slides are going to be. And what I found works well in a lot of situations is to use the video channel where I can get into it as if it's a USB camera, and then just present all my stuff on that, and then just have, like, for example, in Teams, you say spotlight me, and then your picture is the big one that shows up there. And then show the composite video on the video channel. So here's a simple layout, like I was describing. So I've got a client machine that I'm not allowed to install software on, but I am allowed to hook a webcam up to. So I take an encoder, plug it in as a webcam, and then I can have my presentation laptop HDMI to the encoder. And then I can expand on that and actually put a camera into it. Or I can even put an entire computer there that's doing all my compositing. It's got an HDMI output, so there's no interface, data interface from my compositing machine to the client VPN. It's just showing up. It's as if I've got a very, very complicated webcam that I'm hooking into the client machine. And so then I've got my HDMI from my camera and then my presentation laptop, which are using encoders to get into the compositing software and put everything together with that. I've also used a similar setup here when, this is kind of what I'm doing now. I'll show you a more complex one here in a minute. So I've got the WebEx codec, and I'm using HDMI into that. I've got a device that's compositing it all together, and my camera and presentation laptop are all going into that. Old netted machines as possible. Yes, you can do all kinds of crazy things here. But this particular part of that presentation can basically be done. This is what I'm using. There's a device called the ATEM Mini, and it basically has a bunch of HDMI inputs on the back. It can handle green screen, and this is, I've got a slightly bigger one, but this is what I'm using. So this puts all the stuff together and then sends it to the WebEx device. But it also has the USB output, so I can actually plug this into either a client machine or to my own machine if somebody's using Teams. I can go in on my computer, just plug this in as if it's a USB webcam, and then show exactly what I'm showing right here. So it's been very, very useful for different things. It also does things like let you record it and things like that. So when my kids have to record a presentation, they come down, get in front of the green screen, record it, and then they've got an MPEG 4 that's got everything all put together, and they don't have to deal with putting it together after the fact. So this setup right here, which is fairly complex, I can replace it with the ATEM Mini. It replaces all these parts. And so I basically just got this here taking the camera and the presentation laptop, and then has a USB output that can then go to the client machine, or HDMI output to go to the WebEx device. So lots of different things here. And if any of this, if you're like, wait, Mark said this, and this is something that, feel free to reach out with me. I'd love to kind of walk you through things that I've tried that have worked well in this situation, if that's of interest. Big thing is just make sure that you know what's possible, so you don't assume that something's not when it might be. Different conferencing solutions. I'm using WebEx, obviously. One of the big reasons I started it, well, two reasons I started using that instead of some of the other things that were out there is, one, the clients I was working with in the government actually could use WebEx when they couldn't use other things. Now I think most people can use Teams, but I've kind of invested in the hardware for that. Microsoft Teams I've seen work really, really well too. And then there's some other bigger conferencing solutions that are more of, we're going to send people to a web page that everybody comes to. But different options, there are quite a few different options, but the setup stuff that we talked about should work for any of these, because you can give that feed just as a USB camera. Okay, so just out of curiosity, which of these do you prefer to use? If you get to decide, would you rather use WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Google Meet, Facebook Workplace, Amazon Chime? They may have shut Chime down. It was a nice platform for doing video conferencing stuff on it. One thing I found, the other thing I found with WebEx is, from a licensing standpoint, at least in the past, they've been a lot less expensive than some of the other things with Microsoft Teams and Zoom if you're wanting to use actual standalone video conferencing equipment. And I think it's probably because Cisco, which owns WebEx, actually sells a lot of that equipment. And so they're happy to give you a good license to it because they know you're going to buy some of their stuff. Okay, so most of us, it looks like, are in the camp of Microsoft Teams. And I've seen Microsoft Teams work very, very well. It's a very nice product. And they've made, through COVID, they made a huge number of improvements to it. Okay, so overall setup here, this is kind of what I'm using, my setup. Now, like I mentioned, that monitor at the very, very bottom is now on the top next to the camera, because I wanted to keep my line of sight looking more at where people were. So it's more of this setup here, where I've got camera going to, actually, I replaced this part with that ATEM Mini, but it's all going to the WebEx, and then I've got a presentation where I can see my presentation, and then another screen that shows the video conference people there. I will tell you a story. I was giving a talk a number of years ago, and like I mentioned, the video conferencing thing, so this piece right here, the WebEx codec, has a camera, and I have to remember to turn it off, because if I leave it on, you'll get a nice view about me from the waist down, and you'll see the green screen and anything that's on the floor. Well, I was wearing these fuzzy slippers that my wife had gotten me because it was cold and they were very, very warm, and I accidentally left that camera on for the whole talk. And after the talk, somebody's like, yeah, it was kind of weird. There was this shot of you from the waist down, and you had these fuzzy slippers, and I had like some junk sitting around and stuff like that. So one of the mistakes I've made in trying to do online presentations, which brings us to the point of trying to fail with grace. How do we fail? How do we set ourselves up? If we're dealing with software, we want software where if something fails, it does it gracefully and not catastrophically. It's a while back, but I was trying to do a presentation, and right before I did the presentation, I was doing some demonstration with some robots using behavior-driven development. They pushed out a firmware upgrade that kind of ruined everything for a while because all the robots had to update. So this was the best grace I could have in the failure, which was basically just telling people we'll reschedule it for next week. Had I been anticipating that failure more, I could have pivoted to something else, but it was like 5 minutes before the talk that I realized everything that had worked the night before didn't work anymore. We'll skip on through this so we can keep on moving. So failing with grace, couple things, backup equipment. So I've had times where for some reason the setup didn't didn't work, something got upgraded, I have a whole nother computer that I can sit down and give a talk at, just to make sure that if there's something important happening, one single point of failure isn't going to keep me from being able to get on and give a talk. Degrading gracefully. If we do get to a point where for some reason something, the ATEM Mini gets fried, which I've had happen before, I can actually switch to a different camera. There's different ways that I can get to, may not be quite as good at this. I can even go to the talking head just with a presentation. Different things can fail in ways that have different ways that I can get around them. Another good thing to fail with grace is probably make sure you wear pants. I've heard of some situations happening where people assumed they were going to be seen in one particular way, and it turned out they had a camera on they weren't expecting, or they moved somewhere they weren't expecting, and it turned out to not be a good situation for them. So setting up even just simple things. I was working with one team that was all online, and one of the gentlemen that was working with it had the camera pointed back toward the back of his house. Well, at one point, one of his family members walked by the camera wearing a towel. I think they may have been coming from the hot tub or something like that. But if you want to be set up to fail with grace, you may not want your camera aiming at where your family life is going on. Aiming it back into a corner, setting up your desk or whatever it is, so you're not going to, if somebody comes out that's not expecting to be on camera, your camera is not pointing directly at them. Having alternate paths through content. So if you start running out of time, you can shorten things or dig into something more deep. And testing your presentations. My family has sat through many of my presentations and given me feedback on them. And also just the technology of trying to, how are we going to display any of the interaction stuff. Those are all things where lots of stuff can go wrong, and so anything we can do to make that more reliable is helpful. So the big thing I want to leave you with is good talks are not about technology. We've looked at a bunch of technology here, but the technology is not what makes a good talk. However, obtrusive technology can really ruin a talk that's really, really good otherwise. And bringing things back kind of around to the beginning that we talked about, of thinking about today's difficulties, tomorrow's potential, I want to point out that a lot of what I tried to do with this talk is talk about a problem and then a solution. Here's something that can be painful, and here's a way we can potentially resolve it. Now, it may not have had the deep emotional feel that we'd have with some things, but there's this type of thing going on. And this is my attempt to try to take something from the beginning, kind of the theory stuff, and then show how we applied it here. So that wraps up what I was wanting to cover today. So 2 more things I want to do. Oh, yes, I want to let people know next week, Johanna Rothman is going to be talking about fake agile, which I think is going to be great. And then we just got this one scheduled. This is on the 9th. Ben and Greg are going from Kibbe Consulting, are going to be coming and talking just about how to leverage communication for collaboration. I'm really looking forward to this because they're going to be talking about the idea of when you go into communicating, there's different things that people are expecting to get out of a communication and different styles of what they're doing. And if you misinterpret what they're trying to do, you can try to solve all their problems or communicate in a way that's very, very the right thing if they're trying to accomplish one thing, but very, very the wrong thing if they're trying to accomplish something else. Anyway, talking through them, it's going to be not just about Agile, but I think it's very, very key for dealing with software development and agility, because the way we communicate has a huge outsized impact on the success of projects. So hope you guys can come for that. Like I said, that'll be coming out on the 9th. I'll get invitations for that out here pretty soon. And leave you with one last thing here. If you do have just 2 seconds to give me feedback, I would love to see what you thought of this, what you thought was effective, what you thought wasn't. So next time I get ready to do this talk, I can tune and adjust accordingly. So I'm going to stop the recording.